Hi, Ginger. I really appreciate you being part of this conversation. Today, we want to talk about self care, how it's important for women human rights defenders to take care of
Great.
themselves and put the wellness as a center of their work. So, I'm going to get started by asking you to kindly introduce yourself and tell us what you do and how you have been involved in this topic.
Great. So my name is Ginger Norwood, and I've been a women's rights activist and an ally to women's rights activism and movements for maybe 20 years, close to 20 years. I live in Thailand and have worked with women in the Burma movement and other and different Asian social movements around women's rights, and have seen over those many years so many of my friends who are so committed to activism burning out and just losing their energy, losing their passion, and often losing their health, um, and and needing to step away from leave their activism. And it's on a personal level for them, it's so sad, and on a movement level, on a social justice level, the world needs them and needs all of us to be working on the social justice issues we're working on. And so really have been very committed to supporting activist well-being. I mean, really trying to bring up and to support conversations around what it means to have activism as our core and as such a central part of our identity, and to also take time for ourselves and for our own well-being, and to really have well-being at the center of our our care for ourselves and also of our movements. Or really seeing well-being as lacking in so many movements, and that being one of the that resulting in such high levels of burnout and just intense exhaustion in activist communities.
Right. So, as you touched on the topic, I want you to unpack a little bit more why are wellness and self care practices so important to women human rights defenders?
I think they're important for everyone, right? And I think one part of many activist cultures is a feeling that we have to give 150% to the world and to the problems that the world or our communities are facing. And that in so many activist cultures, that has, I think so many activists have internalized that sense that we can't give anything to ourselves, right? That all of our attention needs to be on the world and the problems that we see there, very much at our own expense. And I think that we in activist communities perpetuate that sense of, if you're not giving 150% to the movement, then you're not giving enough. And so that being something that we kind of keep each other in check that way, right? It's like that we all need to be giving more, and that particularly for women human rights defenders, that on top of our gender socialization, which in so many cultures saying that women need to be the caregivers and the providers, and giving to putting other people's needs above our own, that combination of our gender socialization and then the activist culture saying that none of us are working hard enough, those two things then create this sense of, if we ever take any time for ourselves, that we feel guilty, we feel selfish. And in so many communities, we tell each other that, oh, we're being selfish if you're being selfish if you take time, right? So it's really this, it becomes kind of this vicious cycle of, we get burned out, we feel tired, and then we feel guilty for that. And then if we take time off, we feel guilty for that. And so many women's rights defenders are working in such stressful conditions and such conflict conditions that there doesn't feel like there's any time and space to ever just take a step back from that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like in so many movements, everyone just feels so full, and there's just not the time and space to take that step back that we desperately need, right, in order to be in touch enough with ourselves to even understand what we're needing.
So, working as women human rights defenders and feminists in a movement, or even individually for some people, exposes us to some issues that could be basically detrimental to our mental health, right? And if we ignore these issues, it basically piles up. There are some consequences that can affect our mental health. What are some of the ordeals that women human rights defenders will go through as a result of this lack of attention to the self-care?
I think it's certainly mental health, and also I would add to that physical health, right? I feel like mental health and physical health are so deeply interconnected, and that for so many activists, chronic back pain, chronic headaches, chronic neck pain, all of those issues are just assumed to be just a reality that has to be, right? And that I think so much of it is linked to just a deep, deep sense of exhaustion and burnout. Um, that also links to our mental health, right? So I think issues like burnout and of root causes, I feel like, of burnout in so many situations is a sense of kind of moral distress. So when we know what needs to happen, and either because of the institutions we're part of, or more often because the institutions we're fighting against, we can't do what we feel is right. And we can't make any change in that system that is so unjust. And that sense of just distress that causes of not being able to contribute to a more just system leads to a kind of tiredness, a kind of exhaustion that then deeply affects us both mentally and physically. And that sense of losing, that sense of just despair that causes, right? Losing any sense of hope or any sense of perspective on what we are doing. And I feel like so often that is one of the drivers of that sense of I'm not doing enough. When in any given day we're not able to see progress, to see positive change, we put it back onto ourselves and it's, oh, I'm not doing enough. And I feel like we live in cultures, we live in societies which already tell us, and often again tell women, that we're not doing enough, and that has a deep, deep impact on women human rights defenders. And that I'm not doing enough then gets kind of translated into I'm not enough. Just being me, being this person, I'm not enough somehow. And I feel like for me, that's really the main message around well-being and around self-care, is that giving ourselves that space and that permission to just be enough, right? So beyond any, I mean, we'll move probably into techniques, but beyond any techniques or practices that we can do, just that reminder that we are worthy of caring for ourselves, we are worthy of loving ourselves, we are enough, I think is desperately needed in the world and among activist communities.
Right. So what are some of the support systems available to women human rights defenders if they face the symptoms that you just mentioned, like stress, compassion fatigue, secondary trauma? What are some of the basically support systems that is available to them? I know that if we go like do a like simple search, you can't get enough of content out there. But is there anything actually out there which responds to their needs?
My answer would be, it's why self-care in communities, and like what you and Femena are doing of bringing women's rights defenders together to talk about these issues, I think it's so critically needed, because I feel like we have to create communities of care among ourselves. I know a lot of activists who have tried to go to counselors or to psychologists when that's appropriate in their context, and people who are not activists don't get it, right? And it's like, well, if your work is so stressful, then stop your work, right? And that's so deeply insulting to women's rights activists, right? It's so not the answer. When our identities are so connected to our activism and to women's rights and to feminism, to me, it does harm to tell a women's rights activist that she needs to just stop her work. And I feel like that's in more mainstream psychology or more mainstream mental health, I feel like that's often what women are told. And so what we need to do is become that peer support for each other. I think among the practices that I've seen that have been most deeply transformative for women's rights activists is deep listening, right? When we can just create space where we listen to one another without judgment, without advice, with just offering the gift of time and the gift of space, so that the person speaking can hear her own wisdom, can hear her own guidance coming from herself, which can happen when we're given time and we're given a non-judgmental environment to do it in. And so really it's part of my passion in supporting well-being processes and movements, is that sadly I don't know of many supports that activists can turn to that really get activism. And so we can turn to each other, right? And that's where I feel like more and more among activist communities, self-care is being talked about as collective care. And I think it needs to be both, right? We do need to give ourselves that time for self-care and for saying, yes, myself is deserving of my love and my attention, and so is yours. And as your sister, as your co-activist, I want to help create that space for both of us. And so really creating those systems among our organizations, our movements, our networks, I think is key to sustaining our movements.
What are the best practices that one person, if exposed to trauma, can do to help themselves? Like first step that you need to do to take care of yourself, and as a self-care practice.
So I would say the first step is allowing ourselves to feel like we're worth it, right? We're worth giving ourselves the time to deal with that trauma, to heal ourselves, to help ourselves feel better, or to feel well. I think that can happen through mindfulness work. So short breathing exercises or short mindfulness exercises to help our body and our mind to be in the present moment, as this is the one moment that we can control, that we can manage. And so really helping ourselves to be physically and mentally present to help to build that clarity around what we need in this moment. Breathing exercises or body movements. For people for whom breathing exercises don't work, often body movements can help people to feel that sense of being in the present moment. And finding people to talk to. I mean, I'm really an advocate that self-care doesn't have to just be me, right? That it's, if I'm recognizing that my need is to have contact with another person, reaching out. And if we see someone in our community who seems like they really need support, then offering, right? And reaching out to others as well.
Yeah. So have so many activists who are working in more of like a securitized environment, which endangers them. So self-care is not like a luxury thing for them. They really are endangered. So what can we do as a movement, basically practice self-care in that sort of environment?
Yeah, I feel like in contexts which are so insecure and so dangerous, that is really the time when mindfulness is so key, right? It's like when the external environment is so chaotic and so unpredictable, the only thing that we have any control over is our own mind and our own actions, right? And really being able to listen to our own intuition on how to keep safe in any given situation, I think is the only hope. Really, in those moments, kind of the more chaotic the external environment is, the more important I feel like it is to find that 5 or 10 minutes during the day to do the breathing exercises, relaxation exercises, to really try to find that space inside, so that we can listen to our own intuition, get back in touch with our own intuition, and find our own clarity. So that I would say on an individual level, and then on a network or an organizational or movement level, figuring out those strategies that help us to feel connected. And I know that's such a difficult situation. Like right now in the context of Burma, activists feel like it is dangerous for people to be in touch with each other, right? And but finding those ways to break that sense of isolation that conflict creates, right? And so whether that's some kind of secure communication just with one other person where you do a daily check-in, or if it can be more organizational than that, where the organization checks in each day, just to help to remind each person in the organization or in the movement that they're not alone, and that they have someone that they can check in with, and if that check-in doesn't happen, then someone's going to look for them. I think is a really key piece. So I think in most activist communities, I would say there is that sense of accountability to each other and that sense of looking out for each other. And I think that's what keeps people in activist communities, right? Is that they are often it feels like our family. It feels like a social family, right? And I think the more insecure, the more conflict, the more dangerous the situation is, the more those what are often kind of familial or kind of just informal check-ins, the more formal they need to become, right? So that people do find that as a sense of support and a sense of security that they can trust, that they can, have trust in.
What are the best practices and what are some resources out there on the internet for activists if they want to, find a resource that helps them?
Great. So one resource that is free and on the internet is from an organization called Capacitar. And their website is capacitar.org. And they have, the idea of it is kind of peer-to-peer healing, trauma healing. And they work in communities where there has been mass trauma. And it's on very simple self-care, self-healing techniques. So they go into acupuncture, into Tai Chi, into many different kinds of energy work, and really just with the intention of sharing self-healing techniques, self-care techniques, and that anyone can do them, that there doesn't have to be trained experts around to support people in self-care. So that is a resource that is really excellent. From their website, you can download an emergency kit kind of thing, which is a simple PDF, right, that has different exercises on it. If people do feel like something like a calming app, if that has a ring for someone, then definitely try it out, right? I feel like for a lot of people, because we have so much internalized that self-care is selfish or that it's a luxury, you said before, right? That I think a lot of people have, and a lot of movements have internalized that. Oh, it's nice for that person. They can go to their yoga class, but I don't have, that's not my situation. I can't do that, right? So if a person has internalized that feeling of selfishness or that it's for other people, then just allowing themselves to have a little bit of an open mind that, well, I've heard this calming app. Let me try that. Let me see if that might bring a little bit of space to me, right? And just, it may require that open mind to new practices or to practices we've heard of or practices that we may have been resistant to, just to see if they work. And if they don't, then don't do them, right? But there's no harm in giving ourselves that time and space and permission to try new things.
Thank you so much, Ginger, for all you're doing and for this conversation, for your time. It was amazing, and I really enjoyed it. And we should continue this conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. And thanks for creating this space.